The radio crackled to life at 18,000 feet. It was February 13th, 1984, and the voice coming through the static was calm, almost cheerful. "I made it to the summit," Naomi Uemura reported to the photographers circling above in their small plane. "I'm descending now. I'll be at base camp in 2 days." Those would be the last words anyone would ever hear from one of the greatest adventurers the world has ever known. Within 48 hours, the most accomplished solo explorer of the 20th century would vanish without a trace into the frozen wilderness of Alaska's Denali, leaving behind only questions, a diary frozen in a snow cave, and a mystery that haunts the mountaineering world to this day. If you're intrigued by real stories of human endurance pushed to its absolute limits, hit that like button right now and subscribe to WW11 The Experience channel, because what happened to Naomi Uemura on that mountain is a story that will grip you from beginning to end. Naomi Uemura was not supposed to become a legend. Born on February 12, 1941, in a small farming village in Hyogo Prefecture, Japan, he was the youngest of 7 children and a family that worked the land. Shy, quiet, almost painfully introverted, young Naomi seemed destined for a life tending rice paddies and following in his father's footsteps. But inside that reserved exterior burned something else entirely. A restlessness, a hunger for something beyond the familiar horizons of rural Japan. When he entered Meiji University in Tokyo, Naomi did something that would change the trajectory of his entire life. He joined the Alpine Climbing Club, not because he was athletic or confident, quite the opposite. He hoped that conquering mountains might help him conquer the crippling shyness that made even simple social interactions feel like climbing Everest. The mountains did something to Naomi that nothing else could. When he climbed, the shyness disappeared. A quiet farm boy transformed into someone capable of pushing human limits further than anyone thought possible. By his mid-20s, he had solo climbed some of the world's most challenging peaks: Mont Blanc in the Alps, Kilimanjaro in Africa, Aconcagua in South America, the Matterhorn. But Naomi wasn't satisfied with following established routes or climbing with teams. He needed to do what no one else had done. He needed to be alone with the mountain, with the ice, with himself. In 1970, at just 29 years old, Naomi joined Japan's Everest expedition, a massive undertaking with 39 climbers attempting to summit the world's highest peak. When the team reached the top, Naomi had actually arrived first, but in a display of the humility that would define his character throughout his life, he stepped aside and allowed his elder, Teruyu Matsuura, the honor of setting foot on the summit first. It was typical Naomi Uemura: achieve the impossible, then deflect the glory. 3 months after Everest, in August 1970, Naomi did something that cemented his reputation as something beyond an ordinary climber. He became the first person ever to climb Denali, North America's highest peak, at 20,320 feet, completely alone. Not in the busy climbing season when the mountain is dotted with expeditions and rescue would be possible, but in August, when the mountain was nearly empty, when he would be one of only 5 people on the entire massif. He did it fast, too. 8 days up, carrying just a 55-pound pack, when most climbers hauled twice that weight. When he came down, the mountaineering world took notice. Who was this quiet Japanese man who could achieve what large, well-funded expeditions struggled to accomplish? But mountains were just the beginning for Naomi. In 1972, he traveled to Greenland with a vision that seemed insane even to experienced Arctic explorers. He wanted to learn how to survive alone in the most hostile environment on Earth. He moved into the remote Inuit settlement of Siarapaluk in northwest Greenland, one of the most northernmost inhabited places on the planet. The Inuit families welcomed this strange, smiling Japanese man into their homes. Naomi lived with them, ate with them, learned their language, their customs, their survival techniques that had been passed down through generations. He learned how to drive a dog sled, how to read the ice, how to survive temperatures that could kill an unprepared person in minutes, how to navigate by the stars when GPS didn't exist and compasses went haywire near the magnetic pole. The Inuit elders saw something in Naomi that matched their own understanding of the Arctic. He didn't approach their frozen world with arrogance or the assumption that technology could overcome nature. He approached it with respect, with humility, with a genuine desire to learn. They taught him everything they knew. And Naomi, being Naomi, absorbed it all. In April 1973, he tested what he had learned. He set out on a solo dog sled journey along the northwest coast of Greenland, a round trip covering 3,000 kilometers through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. He completed it. Then in December 1974, Naomi embarked on something that would have seemed like pure fantasy if anyone else had proposed it. He would cross the entire Arctic, solo, by dog sled from Greenland to Alaska via the north coast of Canada. 12,000 kilometers, 18 months, alone except for his dog team, through temperatures that regularly dropped to minus 50 degrees Celsius, across ice that could break apart beneath him at any moment, through polar bear territory where a single encounter could mean death. Drop a comment below. Would you have the courage to spend even one night alone on the Arctic ice? Because Naomi Uemura spent 545 nights out there, and what he endured would break most people. The journey was hell. Early in the expedition, his dog team escaped, and he spent days tracking them down across the ice, knowing that without those dogs, he was dead. He lived in constant fear of polar bears, those massive white ghosts that could appear out of nowhere and kill a human being as easily as swatting a fly. One night, a bear invaded his camp, tore through his supplies, its massive snout pressing against his sleeping bag, while Naomi lay frozen with terror, knowing that any movement might trigger an attack. The bear returned the next day. Naomi had no choice. He shot it dead, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the rifle.
On day 35, disaster nearly ended everything. Naomi had settled down on what he thought was solid ice, his dogs bedded down around him. Then came a sound like the earth splitting open. The ice floe he was on had broken apart, leaving him and his dogs stranded on a small island of ice, surrounded by open water, tossing in the Arctic swells. He spent the night in absolute terror, certain he would die there, that the ice would break further, that he and the dogs would plunge into water so cold it would kill them in less than 5 minutes. When dawn came, Naomi spotted a bridge of ice barely a meter wide, connecting his floe to more stable ice. He had seconds to decide: wait and hope the bridge held, or risk everything in a desperate dash across that narrow span. He ran. The dogs followed. They made it. After 545 days, covering 12,000 kilometers, Naomi Uemura reached Alaska in May 1976, becoming the first person in history to complete a solo dog sled journey across the Arctic. The expedition solidified his reputation as the world's premier solo adventurer. But Naomi didn't stop. In 1978, he became the first person to reach the North Pole completely alone, on foot, hauling his supplies across 500 miles of broken ice, pressure ridges, and leads of open water that could swallow him whole. National Geographic sent a photographer named Ira Block to document the journey, and the images of Naomi standing alone at the top of the world captured something essential about his character. A small man, just 5 foot 4 inches tall, grinning beneath layers of frost, his face showing the brutal toll of the journey, but his eyes still bright with that unquenchable spirit. What drove him? People ask that question constantly. Sponsors, journalists, other explorers, they all wanted to know what pushed Naomi Uemura to risk his life over and over in pursuit of achievements that brought no material reward, no wealth, barely even recognition outside of Japan. Naomi's answers were always simple, almost frustratingly so. "I want to test myself," he would say. "I want to know what I'm capable of." But there was something deeper, something he rarely articulated. Each solo journey was a conversation between Naomi and the wildest, most indifferent forces of nature. In those moments, completely alone, hundreds of miles from any other human being, he found a clarity, a sense of purpose that modern life could never provide. The mountains and the ice didn't care about his shyness, his insecurities, his doubts. They only cared whether he was strong enough, skilled enough, determined enough to survive them. And every time he survived, every time he came back, he proved to himself that he was enough. But after the North Pole, Naomi had an even bigger dream. He wanted to be the first person to complete a solo crossing of Antarctica by dog sled. If he could cross the Arctic, he could cross the bottom of the world too. The logistics were enormous. The costs were staggering. But Naomi was determined. In January 1982, he traveled to Argentina, made his way to an Argentine military base on the Antarctic Peninsula, and began his final preparations. Everything was in place: the supplies, the dogs, the route. And then geopolitics destroyed everything. On April 2, 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, triggering a war with Great Britain that would rage for the next 2.5 months. Naomi's expedition, dependent on Argentine logistical support, was cancelled. Just like that, the dream he had nurtured for a decade vanished. Not because he failed, not because the Antarctic defeated him, but because human beings thousands of miles away decided to fight over some islands. Naomi was devastated. He returned to Japan, and for the first time in his career, he seemed uncertain about what to do next. He was 41 years old, no longer a young man. His body bore the scars of countless expeditions. Frostbite had taken portions of his fingers and toes. His knees ached. His lungs carried the damage of breathing air so cold it felt like inhaling glass. But Naomi Uemura was not the kind of man who could simply retire. He needed a new challenge, something that would test him in ways he had never been tested before. And in 1983, he found it. No one had ever climbed Denali, North America's highest peak, solo in winter. Naomi had climbed it alone before, but that was in August when temperatures were merely cold, not lethal. Winter on Denali was different. Winter on Denali was one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Temperatures regularly dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. Winds exceeded 100 miles per hour. The mountain generated its own weather systems, spawning storms that could pin climbers down for days, weeks even, slowly freezing them to death in their tents. Avalanches were unpredictable and deadly. Crevices hidden beneath fresh snow could swallow a climber in an instant, leaving no trace. And if something went wrong, there would be no rescue, not in winter, not in those conditions.
Everyone who knew anything about Denali told Naomi the same thing. Don't do it. Wait for spring. Climb with a partner. But those voices only strengthened his resolve. He had spent his entire adult life doing what people said was impossible. This would be no different. Naomi prepared with his characteristic meticulousness. He designed a self-rescue system, bamboo poles strapped across his shoulders that would span any crevice he fell into, allowing him to pull himself out. He planned to sleep in snow caves, eliminating the need to carry a tent. He would eat cold food to conserve fuel, bringing only the bare minimum of white gas for melting snow into drinking water. His pack weighed just 40 pounds, a fraction of what most winter climbers carried. Speed and efficiency would be his allies. The lighter he was, the faster he could move. The faster he moved, the less time he spent exposed to the killing cold. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, make sure you've hit that subscribe button, because what happens next the climb itself, the radio call, the disappearance. It will haunt you. Part 2 is coming, and you do not want to miss it. In early February 1984, Naomi Uemura flew into Talkeetna, Alaska, the staging ground for Denali expeditions. The bush pilots who flew climbers onto the mountain's lower glaciers looked at him with a mixture of respect and concern. They knew his reputation. They also knew that winter on the mountain was actively trying to kill anyone foolish enough to be up there. Naomi just smiled that quiet smile of his and loaded his gear. On February 2nd, a ski plane dropped him at the 7,000-foot level on the Kahiltna Glacier. The moment the plane took off, Naomi was utterly alone. The temperature was minus 30 Celsius, and that was down here at base camp. Up higher, it would be much, much worse. He began climbing. The first days went smoothly. He established snow caves at strategic points, digging into the snow and ice, creating shelters that would protect him from the wind if storms pinned him down. His diary entries from those early days showed him in good spirits, singing to himself to maintain focus, noting the beauty of the winter landscape, the way the low sun turns the snow into an ocean of gold and pink. But as he climbed higher, the conditions worsened. The cold became vicious. At 14,000 feet, he dug a snow cave and waited out a storm that lasted 3 days. His hands were so cold he could barely write in his diary. His food was frozen solid, impossible to chew. He melted snow and soaked the meat in the hot water just so he could force it down his throat. Minus 40 degrees, the kind of cold that makes your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth, that turns exposed skin black with frostbite in seconds. When the storm broke, Naomi continued. 17,000 feet, 18,000 feet. Each step was a battle. The altitude made his head pound. His lungs burned. The cold was so intense that he could feel it seeping through every layer of clothing, through the insulation, down into his core. And then, on February 12th, his 43rd birthday, Naomi Uemura reached the summit of Denali. Alone. In winter. The first person in history to achieve it. He planted a Japanese flag on top, took a moment to absorb what he had done, and then began the descent. Because summiting is only half the battle. Most climbing deaths happen on the way down. Exhaustion, dropping oxygen levels, the psychological letdown after achieving the goal, all of it contributes to fatal mistakes. Naomi radioed his position to the photographers circling overhead. "I made it! I'm at the summit! I'm coming down now!" He sounded tired but strong. He expected to reach his 18,000-foot camp that evening and rest and then make the final push down to base camp over the next 2 days. The photographers flew back to Talkeetna, confident they would see him soon, ready to document his triumphant return. But Naomi Uemura never made it down. Subscribe to continue Part 2, The Search and Discovery of Body.